We're already live. Welcome to another session of the cycle of conferences of the Master in Digital Twins that we regularly also stream through our YouTube channel. Today we will be hosting the conference at the Civil Engineering School of UPM, and we will be having the pleasure of being lectured by Javier Burrieza from NOMMON. Well, all the participants in the master know Javier very well. He's a professor of one of the courses of the master, mobility and data analysis. Javier is civil engineer of UPM. He's quite a beloved old student of this university. He's also holds a master degree in sustainable urban and transport planning from UPM and KTH from Stockholm. He is a senior business developer at NOMMON. He's been working there since 2018. Is that right? And has been participating in a lot of projects. He will be summarizing today one of them. As I said, he works for NOMMON. NOMMON is one of the members of the Digital Twins project, one of the most active members that is supporting us a lot with their experience in mobility analysis and in general in data analytics. They are basically disrupting the market of mobility data analysis, but they are not only applying this to mobility, they are going now beyond those frontiers and are now applying those new application of digital technologies of data to other sectors like aviation, urban planning, etc. As I said, Javier will show us today their experience in a project that they developed in South America related with the optimization of public transport planning using data analytics. And he will also summarize the practical case that they have developed in the course of mobility data analysis that will certainly be of interest for you all. Thank you very much, Javier, for coming today. Give you the floor.
Thank you, Fernando, for the amazing introduction. Thank you to the Civil Engineering School for having me once again. It's always a pleasure to come back here. As Fernando has said, today we will talk about data fusion in mobility, but not from a theoretical perspective. We will look at it from a very practical one, because we will talk about one of the projects that we have conducted at NOMMON very recently that is very related to this topic of data fusion. We will, in any case, start with an introduction on why we are talking about mobility data fusion. Then we will see this project I was talking about in South America, and then we will end up with the mock-up data fusion case we have prepared for our master's students for you to see which kind of skills are they gaining in our mobility data analysis course. First of all, just to complement the accurate introduction about NOMMON that Fernando gave, we are a Spanish SME. We are part of the project that develops this master, and what we do is to develop decision support tools based on big data and artificial intelligence, mainly for the mobility sector, using geolocation data sources as our primary data source. We reach agreements with those having the data. In many cases, a good example of that are mobility mobile network operators. We have our own mobility analytics technology that powers our what we call data products that basically try to describe in the best possible way how people move. And we have also other type of software products that are tools that go a little bit beyond and try to predict, to anticipate how people will move, and also to tell different decision makers what can they do about it. We are present in Europe and Latin America mainly. And actually, the project I will be presenting today focuses on several of the South American countries we are present in. So why mobility data fusion? Why is this relevant? Well, I think that you can be, that probably all of you are agree with the fact that mobility is a complex issue, right? There's a lot of challenges in mobility. And this is this is of public domain, right? We have challenges associated to environmental sustainability, to equity and inclusiveness, to safety, to efficiency, different aspects that are actually even more complex because all of them have a lot of relationship with new technologies, new societal trends that change the way we have to approach to these challenges every time, right? So in general, there is a need, when talking about planning or managing mobility, there is a need of understanding the mobility needs of the population and providing citizens with attractive options for reducing private car use, which is the driver of many of the externalities we have in this slide. What we need for this? We need data. So the mobility domain is a domain where data is very relevant. Talking about the relationship with digital twins, I think that we can also agree that mobility is a key aspect of many digital twins, not of all digital twins, because of course, digital twins can have a very wide variety of scopes. But when we are talking of large-scale digital twins, such as a city, a region, mobility is one of the key layers of a digital twin, right? And actually is not only important, but also complex because it's a very dynamic layer. The infrastructure suffers much less changes. The socio-demographics are much more stable, but mobility is probably the most one of the most dynamic components in a city. Actually, I have brought this image of the first digital twin I was aware of, a video game, SimCity. That already in 2004, mobility was actually one of the key aspects of the game, right? So I think that this is very clear. What this means that anyone developing a large-scale digital twin will need to consider or will need to develop a mobility data strategy. And actually, what we are trying to convey to our students in the subject is how they can develop that mobility data strategy for their own digital twins they will develop in the future. Okay, before starting to talk about mobility data fusion, I think it's important to reflect upon what is mobility data. In general, or at least this is the definition and the nuances we are using in the course, we can talk about data that measures how people move, measures population movements. This seems an accurate definition, but there is a lot of nuances to that. Are we talking about only people movements, or are we talking also about vehicle movements? This will depend on the scope of our digital twin. In some digital twins, the focus will be on vehicles. In others, will be on people. In others, will be on both, right? Another interesting aspect is what happens with goods, with freight transport. These are very often overlooked by many transport models in the past, and perhaps also by some early digital twins. But it is still very relevant. One of the most important challenges in urban mobility or in urban transport is the organization of logistics within the city, and this will become more and more relevant. Where is the challenge there related to data? That having access to data about urban freight movements and even to long distance freight movements is very, very difficult. So this is one of the challenges ahead. Also, another aspect important to take into account when talking about mobility data is to understand from each data source we may work with, to understand if we are talking about a data source that covers all modes or not. Our trips are made by certain transport modes. We sometimes move ourselves by walking, other times we use public transport, other times we use our cars. So it is important to have data not only from a specific mode, but covering all transport options available. There are a lot of mobility data sources out there, and there are a lot of ways to classify them. It's very difficult to develop a standard one, right? It is true that in our course, we are using the one you can see in this slide, differentiating between first of all mobility surveys, which were the traditional way to acquire mobility data and to understand how people move in the city. We will see that they still play a role, and they will still play a role. And with technology, a lot of new data sources have come up in recent decades, right? Some of them are already there for many years, such as some technologies for counting vehicles, for developing traffic counts, which are part of this sensor vehicle data technologies. And others have become, we will focus on them actually, have become more and more popular in recent times. Two aspects that needs to be highlighted with talking about mobility data sources is, first of all, not all of these data sources come from the mobility sector. There may be the case, and we will see that some very interesting data sources come, from instance, from telecommunication companies, such as mobile network operators, right? Another interesting aspect that we must take into account is that we must be aware of the access and knowledge barriers when working with this data. Not all data sources are accessible. Some of them are proprietary. Some of them you need to pay for them, for instance, and some of them are not very easy to use. You need a lot of skills and knowledge in different domains to be actually ready to analyze them. Let's look at what we call, at least at NOMMON, geolocation data, which includes different types of what we call floating personal data and floating vehicle data. This means data sources that are generated by devices that we or our vehicles have when moving, right? The main data sources we work with are going to be listed now. A very important data source that have become very popular in recent times is mobile network data. Mobile network data includes the interactions between our mobile devices, our mobile phones, and the antennas. What we know with this data source, into which antenna is every single mobile device connected at each time. So it is actually composed of two databases as a minimum. On the one hand, this type of registers of a device identifier and an antenna identifier and a timestamp, so we know to which antenna is connected each device, and also the map of antennas, of course, because otherwise we couldn't locate the registers. This is an example of what I was mentioning before, that some of these data sources are not collected by agents or stakeholders from the transport sector. This is collected by mobile network operators, who most of them do not know nothing about mobility. So this is a challenge in itself. Other type of geolocation data that is also very, very interesting is what we call sometimes app-based data. This is a slightly different type of data than mobile network data, because this is related to what we can call the GPS pings, or the location pings generated by mobile apps. In this case, we have a device identifier again, a mobile device identifier, but we have the at least the estimated coordinates of where the device is present. This is collected by mobile app providers. Most of the mobile apps we have installed in our smartphones use location data and collect location data, and some of them, even of course the consent of the user, commercialize this location data. A third type of floating personal data is what we call sometimes automated fare collation data, and other times also most generally known as public transport smart card data. This refers to the registers that our public transport smart cards leave in the system when we use public transport. For instance, in the case of Madrid, the public transport smart card from the consortio de Transportes de Madrid, right? For this, the data set is quite simple in a way, right? We have a card identifier, anonymized, of course, a service ID where we have access to the public transport network, a stop ID, and a timestamp. This, contrary to the previous data sources, this is collected by one of the most relevant stakeholders in the mobility sector, which is actually public transport authorities and operators, right? Besides these three geolocation data sources I have highlighted, and we will see them in the practical case, there are other two types of floating data that are very interesting because they target vehicles. We have, on the one hand, navigation data. This is the GPS pings generated by our vehicle navigation apps. Probably most of you have in mind some examples of those, TomTom, Waze, etc. They also collect information about the location of the vehicles where the navigation app is installed, right? So you have again an identifier and a series of GPS pings along the road network. This is also, of course, a very interesting data for powering our digital twins. But together with navigation data, a new type of data source have emerged very recently, which is what we can call connected car data. This refers to the data generated to the vehicles that are already that have already some sensor integrated since the very beginning, since the fabrication of the vehicle itself. So most of the commercial brands we all know commercializing private cars already can provide this type of data from their connected fleets. Again, in these data sets, we will find a vehicle ID, anonymized, of course, and a series of GPS positions along the way. What is very interesting, and in order to answer this question of why mobility data fusion is important, the key is what I'm going to say now. All of these data sources have their own strengths, but also their own limitations. So the key here, even if talking only about geolocation data, even if we don't include other data sources, is that all of them perform very well in some aspects, but have important gaps in other aspects. Here, for instance, I have brought up quite qualitative analysis of these geolocation data sources we have seen in several aspects, such as sample size, the spatial coverage, etc. And you can see that there is no single data source that performs very well in all aspects, right? So what we can learn from this, and this is the first key message I would like to highlight today, is that it is true that different mobility data sources provide very rich information about how travel demand is in a territory, but no data source provides the full picture. And that's why in mobility planning in more general, more specifically when developing a mobility data strategy for a digital twin, we need to develop data fusion approaches. We need to embrace data fusion approaches so that we are sure that we get the most accurate picture about how people move in a city. Okay, so let's see this in action. Let's see an example of how we can combine these data sources to help the transport sector get an accurate picture of how people move. I will explain you a project we conducted in several cities in Latin America. This was a project promoted by the World Bank and commissioned to NOMMON in 2021. And the context of the project was the sharp decrease in public transport ridership suffered by many cities during the pandemic. As you know, the pandemic brought a lot of challenges to public transport operators because they had to face a lot of measures related to social distancing, etc. And it was very, very hard for them to understand how they could recover from that situation and how they could ensure their own financial viability, right? So the World Bank, in this situation, in their conversations with different governments in South America, wanted to develop a methodology that take advantages of the increasing availability of geolocation data, of the different data sources we have seen, to be able to produce what it's called in mobility planning origin destination matrices, basically tables showing how many people move from one part of the city to another, covering different time periods, pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and already in 2021, after the worst period of the COVID-19, so that we could, or that they could understand what happened with the demand, why people was not using public transport that often anymore. We developed this methodology and applied it initially in Bogota and Buenos Aires, in two of the major cities in Latin America. And then we replicated the methodology in Medellin, and we are actually, we are currently conducting a project in Asunción, in the capital city of Paraguay, with the same approach. I will focus on the Buenos Aires and Bogota cases, the first two. Here you can see the type of travel demand information we wanted to get from the combination of different mobility data sources. Basically, what we wanted is a series of tables showing the movements between different zones in both cities. In the case of Buenos Aires, up to 2,000 zones, and in the case of Bogota, a little bit more than 1,000 zones, in different types of dates. Mobility changes from day to day. The weekend mobility patterns are very different to weekday mobility patterns, for instance. So it's important to analyze, in most cases, several times. And as I anticipated before, covering different periods from 2019, 2020, and 2021. But in most cases, we are not only interested about the total amount of people moving from these zones, right? What is very interesting in many cases is to understand different demand segments or different groups of people traveling. That's why we segmented this information by age, by gender, by home location, by trip purpose, by transport mode, etc. Different segmentations that provide the authorities, the local authorities in these cities, with different information about how people change their mobility patterns. What we have on the table with which of the data sources I was presenting before could we play in this project? First of all, we have mobile network data from Colombian and Argentinian operators with very good properties for working as a primary data source in this project. But we also have public transport smart card data from both public transport authorities in Bogota and Medellin. This is very, very interesting because it can provide a lot of information about public transport usage, right? And the third main data source I will explain how we integrate it, is household travel survey data. In both cities, there were quite recent household travel surveys performed just before the pandemic, and this was very useful to understand some aspects that are difficult to extract from geolocation data sources. Let's see at how we solved this data fusion exercise. We started by analyzing mobile network data. Mobile network data has a lot of properties that are interesting as a primary data source, particularly a very large sample size. We are talking about sample sizes of nearly 25%, 30% of the population just by reaching an agreement with a single mobile network operator. This is very interesting because you can have, this is very important to have a very large sample size, because with this you can analyze with a very high degree of accuracy the trip generation and distribution patterns. This means how many trips people perform every day, and also from where to where people move. We use one of our products, at NOMMON to analyze this mobile network data, so that we can have this mobility network in the city to understand how many people move from one neighborhood to another. But this is not enough. I was mentioning that one of the aspects we wanted to analyze is the transport mode choice, which mode was chosen by travelers when moving from A to B. And this is where both the public transport smart card data and the household travel survey play a role. Let's see how we use the household travel survey. The household travel survey is a very interesting data source because even though the sample size is very limited, that's why it's a quite limited source for analyzing trip generation and distribution patterns. The truth is that we have full control of what we want to ask travelers. And this means that we can get a very rich information from them, right? This can target, for instance, in most cases, 1% of the population. So much less than mobile network data, but again, from this 1% of the population, we have a very rich information. Here is where one of the possible strategies for data fusion plays a role. In this case, we used artificial intelligence, machine learning techniques, more precisely, to analyze the relationship between the characteristics of the travelers and the characteristics of the trip and the transport mode chosen and the transport mode reported to be chosen in the survey. With this, we can train a model, as I said, using machine learning techniques that reproduces the mode choice patterns observed in the survey. If you use for this model variables that in the mobile network data, what you can do is to assign probabilities to the trips observed in mobile network data related to the chances of having used one mode or another. You could stop here and say, okay, I have the probabilities from the survey, so I can apply them to the mobile network data, and that will be the end of the story. But fortunately, in this project, we have the public transport smart card data, which increases a lot the accuracy of the estimation we can do. Why? Because what we can do from the probabilities of the model is to separate them in two groups. On the one hand, those trips that we know already because of the probabilities of the model, and also because perhaps there is no public transport supply for performing that trip, that could not use at all, in any case, public transport. So probably, or it's quite likely that they use other type of modes. What we did in this project is that for those trips that may have used public transport, we analyze them using the public transport smart. How? What we did is to use again another NOMMON product focused on the analysis of public transport smart card data to extract the movements of public transport users in the network. By this way, we have a reference value for the movements between each pair of stops in the network. So what we did is that we took the trips observed from mobile network data with their own probabilities of having chosen public transport and start to assign them to the network until we reach the demand levels coming from the public transport smart card data. In that way, we end up combining the probabilities from the model with the travel survey with the public transport smart card data information. We end up with a full estimation of the transport mode chosen by each trip observed in the mobile network data. Much more accurate than if we only would have used household travel surveys and overcoming the limitation present in mobile network data related to transport mode identification. This is the type of solution we are actually working in many projects, not only now in South America, but also in Spain, for instance, for helping cities analyze their transport mode choice patterns. Some results that we can get from this combination of data sources. It was a very interesting project because we could analyze very precisely what happened with mobility in these cities during the pandemic, right? For instance, in terms of trip generation rates, we were able to assess if in 2021 we were still below 2019 levels, and this was the case, particularly in the wealthiest neighborhoods where more and more people were adopting remote working, for instance, right? So this is the kind of analysis that we, with this kind of data fusion strategies, can provide to cities. And this happened with different intensity, both in Buenos Aires and Bogota. Another very relevant focus of the project, because as Fernando said, it was very related to public transport optimization. It was very crucial to understand what happened with the modal split in these cities during the pandemic, right? So starting from 2019 levels, where public transport were very relevant in these cities, actually the second most frequent option for traveling in these cities, we could quantify the drop in modal share during the pandemic. In 2020, this was reduced, for instance, in the case of Buenos Aires, below 10% of modal share of public transport, and suffering a quite sharp increase in, for instance, in the private vehicle modal share. What was interesting also is to trying to understand what happened during the recovery, and if in 2021 the modal share was fully recovered. It was interesting to see that in the case of Bogota, the modal transfers, the modal shifts were more between public transport and active modes, while in the case of Buenos Aires, private vehicles captured some demand from public transport that needs to be recaptured in the upcoming years. So the example we have seen focuses on a project that at that point was not still completely related to digital twins. Of course, the information we obtain in this study, perhaps in the future, is used as part of a digital twin in this series. But the truth is that it was an initiative outside of the world of digital twins, I can say. So what we have been discussing with our students in the master is a very similar mock-up exercise, but in a context of what would be a digital twin. What is the main difference? That when we are talking about a digital twin, we in principle need very up-to-date data, and we need a study not only to acquire this data, analyze it, but also to update in a continuous manner this data, because we want our digital twins to be the best possible representation of how reality is in this precise moment, not in a specific study period, right? For this, we took an example or a fictitious example in Barcelona, in the Barcelona metropolitan area, because it's an environment where there's a lot of data sources available, and it's a very interesting environment because it's quite complex. So the developing of a digital twin there will be quite challenging in terms of mobility. So we propose this case to the students. How we conceptualize the information that this digital twin should digest. We proposed or we defined a monthly update of the mobility data, which is in general fair enough for this kind of digital twins. But this could even go beyond. It could be on a weekly basis, or even on a daily basis. But for the purposes of the digital twin, we have an example. As an example, this will be enough. What we propose to the students is that they will need to develop a mobility data study able to cover these specifications: orderly orient destination matrices, covering the full metropolitan area, to cover each day of the first week of each month, so that every month we have a picture of how mobility is in the city, and that must be delivered at the end of each month. This means that the mobility data study here have only 3 weeks for analyzing the data. And the information have to be segmented by transport mode and trip purpose. What are the available data sources we gave to the students? Here you have the list. This first list includes those data sources that will be available from the digital twin user. This is something very important to differentiate when developing a mobility data strategy, because some of the data sources are already available by the one asking for that study, right? In this case, for instance, the Metropolitan Transport Authority of Barcelona. This includes public transport smart card. As we have seen in the previous example, this is in many cases very interesting, but also other types of data sources that may be helpful. Here you can see this is still a mock-up example again, but you can see here some of the frequent properties that these data sources have in terms of sample size, in terms of resolution, etc. And this is what we often find when starting to develop a mobility data study. But also, in many cases, we can resort to other data sources that must be purchased if there are enough resources, right? For instance, in this case, we propose to the students that they could use, if they find appropriate, 2 types of data sources: mobile network data and app-based data. Here you can see some of the typical characteristics of these data sources, and also the access conditions, as I mentioned. And this is again one of the key messages I will highlight in a few minutes. Access conditions, prices, etc., are at least as important as the quality aspect or the scope aspect of the data sources. Alternative strategies. The students are working actually during these weeks in this assignment. They need to produce a very brief technical note showing what the mobility data study will be for them. And it is a very interesting assignment because there is no a single solution. Mobility data studies hardly have a single solution. Depending on the focus of the project, depending on the aspects that must be analyzed more carefully, perhaps one solution is better than another. What it is true is that and most of the students are working in this way. As we have seen during the previous example, mobile network data and public transport smart card data are nowadays two sources that are very interesting in an urban context. Because, as I mentioned, mobile network data provides you with a very large sample size, so you can characterize very well trip generation and trip distribution patterns. And public transport smart card data provides you with a very high detailed information on how people use public transport. So this is very interesting, of course, for transport mode analysis. But a lot of alternatives arise regarding the remaining data sources. In terms of the survey data, this may be used by many ways. You can use it, as in the example we have seen before, for refining the trip mode identification. But you can also say, okay, I want to analyze more trip purposes than the ones we can analyze from mobile network data. For instance, in mobile network data, we cannot differ between someone traveling to this school, for instance, between workers and students, because some of them may share the same age, some of them may share the same trip times, etc. Perhaps the survey can give you more information about this. Another interesting aspect is the use of ticketing data of other types of public transport data besides the information in the public transport smart cards. You have seen here in the characteristics of the public transport smart card data that this has a sample size of 90%. This is a lot. This is a vast majority of the trips performed in the system, but not all trips. And for instance, in a city of like Barcelona, perhaps those public transport lines providing access to the port or to the airport have a very low share of users using the public transport smart cards, because most of them perhaps are tourists. So that's why in some cases you can also have other data sources such as public transport ticketing data to have a reference of the total number of passengers and adjust the estimations you can extract from public transport smart card data. Traffic counts, very similar approach, but regarding private vehicle movements. And it is true that with this approach, you can already extract quite accurate information about private vehicle movements in the city. But if you have traffic counts in different roads, you can, of course, adjust and refine this estimation. And finally, app-based data. I'm very interested to see how students integrate this data source, because as you can see here, mobile network data, one of the limitations of mobile network data is that the spatial resolution is not that high, right? We mainly depend on the density of antennas. The more antennas we have in the city, the more spatial resolution we have, because the information we know is the antenna to which we are connected. This means that in some cases, having app-based data, complementary app-based data, is interesting, because you can perhaps combine both data sources to have a more accurate estimation of the actual origins and destination of the trips. We will see how students decide to integrate this data source, also taking into account, of course, the costs of the data source. So, to sum up, before answering any question you may have, I would like to highlight some key takeaways from this presentation. First, large-scale digital twins require a mobility data study. When we talk about developing a digital twin of a city, of a region, we will need a mobility data study. And this directly means a mobility data fusion study, because as we have seen, there is no single data source that provides all the information we need. Second, of course, the data scope and the criteria is very important. The data scope and quality criteria is very important. We need data sources that are accurate, that are able to measure all the trips we want to cover in our digital twin. But when developing a digital twin, there's a lot of governance aspect in the table, and also in many cases limited resources. So data access and costs matter. This is something that, for instance, some emerging concepts such as the data spaces are trying to put emphasis on, right, on data governance, etc. Third message: there is no a single data fusion solution. As we have seen in the example we have given to our students, there are many possibilities of combining data sources to come up with an accurate estimation of how people move. And finally, what we see from NOMMON is that new professional skills are required in this sector. The emergence of geolocation data sources is a challenge for the transportation sector and for civil engineers specialized in transport, because the ability to coordinate transport engineers, data scientists, and software developers is more and more important. This is a very key skill that anyone willing to coordinate or to manage digital twins will need to acquire. And hopefully, and I think this is the case, the master that is being outlined during this year and is part of this project, I think is actually an excellent opportunity to cover this need, including the mobility data analysis course itself, but also other different courses included in the master. So that was all from my side today. I will be willing to, of course, to answer any question you may have, and it has been a pleasure to be with you here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Javier, and thanks a lot for highlighting the importance of a master to couple with the future of digital twins. So we are going to open now the Q&A. Before that, we will be saying goodbye to every follower who is following the streaming at YouTube, and will remain at the Zoom session for the students of the master, and of course for the attendance of the room. Let me start with first probably naive question on digital twins. How far are we, and what are the main challenges that we may have to have a real-time based digital twin on the mobility of a city? Is it a technological or a legal challenge?